All right, so we're going to look at this antebellum revival and reform. Some of this is a repeat of what we've already seen with this stuff, but it goes into a little bit more detail. That's why I've got you with these handouts, so you don't have to write it all down as we go through, okay? It just gives you more detail on this kind of stuff. This time period we call the Second Great Awakening. Now, the First Great Awakening had happened way back in the colonial time period. And an awakening in history is a religious movement, okay? Well, this is our Second Great Awakening, our second big spiritual revivalism as a country. We go through these on average about every 60 or 70 years. We have a massive awakening. And it's going to have all these parts involved with it. It's going to be driven mostly by religion, but you're going to have temperance in there. Remember temperance we talked about before was the move to stop drunkenness. It also is going to be the move for prohibition. Abolitionism, trying to outlaw slavery, and we'll see why on a religious ground. The first public schools, so education is going to be a big part of this. Women's rights and hospital rights. We talked about asylums and how for the first time the mentally ill are going to be seen as sick and not as criminals. That's a big difference in this time period, okay? All right. If I go too fast, y'all let me know. But like I said, most of this stuff's going to be written down. So, religion had always been a big deal in America. But you're going to have a rise of what we call popular religion. This is where religion kind of becomes the cool thing to do. To such an extent that you're going to have traveling ministers at this time that travel around in what they call Chautauqua tents that were like rock stars coming in. And people would come from hundreds of miles away in their wagons to watch these ministers speak. And it would be like Elvis walked out on the stage. Women would literally faint and pass out in presence of the gods. You know, it was a bizarre thing that was happening. This is from 1832. There was a Frenchman named Alexis de Tocqueville who came to America, and he was greatly impressed by us. This is right in the midst of this Second Great Awakening. And this is a quote from him. He said, "In France, I had almost always seen the spirit of religion and the spirit of freedom pursuing courses diametrically opposed to each other. But in America, I found that they were intimately united, and they reigned in common over the same country. Religion was the foremost of the political institutions of the United States." So what he's saying here is, unlike in the rest of the world, where religion was seen as something to control the people by the government, in America, religion was more about the spirit of freedom. And we exercised our religious rights with a fervor that he'd never seen in France. He liked that about America, okay? The fact that we put those two things together. Your right to religion was an American right. Religious freedom is a big deal. The other thing that happens is we have this attempt to attain perfection in this time period. There seemed to be this belief that perfection might actually be attainable by mankind. And if we just followed the right rules or took the right scriptural steps, mankind can become perfect. That is a new kind of idea. So this is antebellum. Ante means, this is before. So antebellum, before the war, okay? Before the Civil War in this case. So there's this idea of how this religion spread. And most of it's going to start up here in Utica, New York, in this area. Utica is just above Syracuse, if you know anything about New York. Almost in Canada. And they jokingly called it the Benevolent Empire. Because from this spot in New York, it's going to spread all the way through the Great Lakes area, New England, all the way down into at least the topmost portion of the southern states. It's going to reach down into Tennessee, the Carolinas, okay, Virginia. It's not really going to go much deeper than that, but there wasn't a whole lot more to the country. We're talking 1825 to 1846. We call it a benevolent empire because this is an empire of God. It didn't spread at the sword. It spreaded with the Bible, with Scripture, okay? And with these traveling ministers. In fact, there are so many churches that appear in this area. This is the same area. This is the same map, believe it or not. If you go back here, Lake Erie, Lake Michigan, you come back here, this is Lake Ontario, Lake Erie. This is the same place. We started calling this area the Burned Over District. You can see Utica, New York, Seneca Falls, New York is right here. That's where later on women's rights are going to take off. All of these are churches that started to appear. And if you look at that, you can see that the blue ones are Mormon churches that appear. The red ones are anti-slavery churches that start to appear. All these green spots you see all over the place are places we had revivals. You had the Millerites. You had all these groups, and they're all emerging in this one spot. We call it the burned over because it was as if the Spirit of God had come through like a wildfire and just burned everything. Okay, this was not considered a negative thing. It was very much just praising God's glory. He burned over this whole area. Okay, amazing if you think about it. We haven't had one of these in a few years. In fact, the U.S. is pretty due for another awakening. If you look at cycles. You look at it and you go, we're right there where one should start to happen. And if you look at what happened in the last couple of election cycles, you've seen where it looks like it may be starting to emerge in America. We may be getting a burned over America again, where the evangelicals have united behind one man or one party. It happens quite a bit. This is just a picture of a revival meeting, and you can see what it was like. These ministers would come in, people would bring their tents, and they would stay for days and listen to these like it was a rock and roll concert, okay? It was, could you imagine traveling all around the world to hear somebody preach, okay? And some people still do this, but for the most part, most of us aren't spending our weekends going out to watch a pastor 100 miles away. These people were. This is Charles Feeney. Charles Feeney is an early minister of the Second Great Awakening. He's credited with inventing the altar call. If you ever go to church and you hear that pastor say something at the end of the service, if God hasn't found you yet, why don't you come on down here and meet God and confess your need for God. They're calling you to the altar. It's almost a way of, it's like almost shaming somebody to come in there. Charles Feeney is the guy that kind of made that famous. He would travel around, and when he had altar calls, he might baptize hundreds of people at a time. All these people were saved today. This is a quote from him. The ranges of tents, the fires reflecting lights, the candles and lamps illuminating the encampment, hundreds moving to and fro, the preaching, praying, singing, and shouting, like the sound of many waters, was enough to swallow up all the powers of contemplation. That sounds like a wild time, okay? I love going to church. But when I go to church, this isn't what church is like. This is what a KISS concert was like when I went to it, okay? This is a different kind of thing, all right? We talked about this guy, Joseph Smith, in the last lecture, but I want to make sure that we at least kind of go over him in a little bit more detail because he ends up on exams quite a bit. This is the founder of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or the Mormons, as they're more commonly called. Joseph Smith, we talked about the golden tablets that he found in 1823. These golden tablets allegedly had another book of Christ written on it, the Book of Mormon. And it was written in a lost language like hieroglyphics that only Joseph Smith could understand. He deciphered it and he presented it to the people. When they asked Joseph Smith, where are the tablets? Well, God took them back after I translated it. So nobody's seen the golden tablets. But that's published as the Book of Mormon. He is going to found this new religion. The basic tenements of that religion is that Jesus brought the gospel directly to America, to the Indians. Because in his mind, if you ever take world history, they talk about the lost tribes of Israel. There are tribes that have never been found. He believes that those tribes were the American Indians. And Jesus was coming back to bring them the good word. That's the big tenement. The other is polygamy, many wives. Joseph Smith kind of had a history of trouble with the law before this. He'd been kind of a con man. And gets ran out of New York, goes to Illinois. He's murdered in Illinois. Gets very, very violent. Everywhere they went, there was violence against the Mormons. This is a artist rendition of what was going on in Illinois. They are you have average Americans slaughtering Mormons because their religion is different. Okay? That's not a very American ideal. The American ideal is you're free to have your religion. But here, that religion was so different from any other type of Christianity that it's met with violence everywhere it goes. So they're going to leave New York. They're going to end up going down to Illinois, to Missouri independence, before finally settling in what's called the Desiree community in Salt Lake City, Utah today. So this whole area this brown area over here, becomes the Mormon center of the United States, and it still is today. The guy that led them to Desiree is Brigham Young. He takes over for Joseph Smith. If that name sounds familiar to you, Brigham Young University. If you're a football fan, you might remember a great quarterback named Steve Young. This is he's a descendant of him. But Brigham Young is the guy that's going to really turn the Mormon church, or the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, into the powerhouse that it is. And today, it is the fastest growing religion in the world. Okay? So it's been pretty effective. Mother Ann Lee, we talked about her. She was a millennialist. She believed that we were already living in the end days. And because of that, she is going to preach absolute separation of the sexes. Men and women separate. Now, they did have dances, but I'll show you a picture in a little while where the men dance together and the women dance together kind of across from each other. It's kind of a different situation. Why would they do that? Well, again, they believe that we're in the end days. Christ is returning, and the world is going to end. And it would not be fair to bring new people into the world in that situation. And since they believe the only legitimate reason for sex is reproduction, and they don't want to reproduce, they just keep everybody separate. Okay? I'm not going to read all this to you, but it is interesting that they really pushed talent. This is why we talk of shaker furniture. I'll show you some examples in a minute. The thought is that if God blessed you with a talent, you should work hard to make that talent as good as possible. This is a painting of a shaker meeting, and you can see they're together and they're dancing. But again, absolute separation of the sexes, okay? They may look at each other across the room, but they're dancing next to people of their own sex. I'm skipping some of this for us. This is examples of shaker furniture you might have seen. Very simple, but became very famous. Shaker furniture is very valuable today. If you can find some of this, it's just very, very simple furniture. You may have seen this stuff before. You see how this is hung here? This was really common at this time period because a lot of people lived in one room. You know, your house was just one room. Everybody slept there. So you needed to be able to put the furniture away to use the floor for other things. Very, very common. All right, I'm going to stop here because we have other things to do. We'll pick up with transcendentalism for the next lecture. We'll do that probably tomorrow, and then I can put this up I needed to record this so I can get it out to the other class. Okay, so we'll stop there.